Welcome to The Cynical Developer, the podcast that helps you to improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology and providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. In this episode, we talk to Robert C. Martin. Many of you might know him as Uncle Bob. And we're here to talk today about Agile and taking it back to basics, because many people say that they're doing Agile and they're really not. They're either overcomplicating it or they're just way off the mark. So Uncle Bob has been a programmer since 1970. He is a Master Craftsman at 8th Light Incorporated. He's co-founder of the online video training company cleancoders.com and founder of Uncle Bob Consulting LLC. He's an acclaimed speaker at conferences worldwide and an author of many books, including The Clean Coder, Clean Code, Agile Software Development, Principles, Patterns and Practices, and UML for Java programmers. He's a prolific writer and has published hundreds of articles, papers and blogs. He's served as an editor-in-chief for the C++ report and is the first chairman of the Agile Alliance. He's the creator of the acclaimed educational video series at cleancoders.com. And to now add to that impressive list, he's also been a guest on the Cynical Developer podcast. So welcome to the Cynical Developer.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time out to come and talk to me.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, it's one of those surreal things where you jump into this space of podcasting and you suddenly get the opportunity to talk to these people that you've admired and you'd followed from afar for so many years. And before we were recording, I was saying how many books that I've got of yours in the background. And a couple of weeks ago, we spoke to the guys from the Pragmatic Programmers as well. So,
yes,
it's really interesting to sort of get your guys' takes on it, because you're a lot more professional. You've been doing this game a lot longer than we have, and yet I'm here going, this is how you do things. But speaking to yourselves, I have to sort of bow down and go, right, am I doing this right? What's your point of view? So I think today's going to be a really interesting talk.
well, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so we're here to talk about Agile. And for those of you out there that maybe don't know what Agile is, are you able to give us a brief overview of what it is?
Agile is sometimes said to be the way that software developers are observed to behave in the wild. If you give a group of software developers a task to perform and you give them no process at all and you just kind of lock them in a room and let them go, odds are that they will work in a way that we would call Agile today. But let me go through the steps, because the steps are not very complicated. The idea behind Agile, of course, is that you take a project and you break it up into very small segments. Usually those segments are 1 or 2 weeks long. And then you implement the project by writing enough of the project every segment, every iteration, every 2 weeks, so that you have something to deliver every 2 weeks. And usually what you can deliver is very small. It's hard to get much done in 2 weeks, but you get something done and done completely. So you have some part of a feature done completely. And by completely, I mean complete enough to deploy. Now, it may not be complete enough for the business to find valuable, but it's complete enough to deploy from the point of view of it's been tested and documented and fully implemented. And we just do that around and around and around over and over again. One segment after the next, one iteration after the next. And by doing that, we can measure how much we get done in a segment, in an iteration. Some 2 week period, we can measure how much we got done. And then we can look at how much remains to be done. And we can make a very reasoned guess about when we will be done with the project, or rather, when we will be done with enough to satisfy the customers. Now, that's an extremely high-level view of what Agile is, but it gives you the basics. It's a way to chop the project up into very fine little bits and then measure how much you are getting done during that period of time by measuring each bit and then projecting forward.
Yeah, so it helps you to get that MVP, that minimal viable product, out to the customer as quickly as possible. Whereas the old world way of doing it with waterfall was go for the big bang, get that out, and then work out or find out that what you just spent 5 years building is not what the customer wanted.
Well, that's always been part of the problem, is that the poor customer, you ask the customer what they want, and the customer really doesn't know what they want. They know what their need is, but they don't really know what system is going to answer that need very well. And when you finally show them a system that they requested, and they discover that, of course, that doesn't really answer the need that they have. And also their needs change pretty rapidly over time. And so when you're working in an agile way, you're checking back with the customer every week or two, and they're looking at what you're developing and thinking, oh, yeah, that's what we said we wanted, but it isn't what we need. It needs to change in this way. And so there is this constant feedback between the developers and the customer so that the project can be driven to the best possible outcome as opposed to the original target.
Yeah, so in a previous life, I used to be a graphic designer, and I still do that as part of my my own business. And in the design stages of it, I think we've always done a little bit of agile, whereas you would sit down with the customer and go, right, what do you want? And they go, well, we're not too sure. We want a website that does this, and we want it to look a bit like this. And go, okay, so you do a little bit. And they go, that's not what we want. It's like, well, what do you want? Well, I don't know, but I'll know it when I see it. So you show them in small pieces, and it's now taking that from the design, just the design phases, all the way through the actual build phases as well.
So that's one of the benefits of Agile, is that you work collaboratively with the customer to guide the project to an outcome that neither the developers nor the customer saw initially, but it becomes clearer as time goes on.
Yeah, and it and obviously at the end of it, you end up with what the customer needed, not necessarily what they wanted in the first place.
Yes, and often much less than they said they wanted.
Yeah.
One of the surprises, of course, is that we could get by with just that.
Yeah. It's something going into a lot of businesses that I've had to deal with myself as well, where they're trying to be a hero. They're trying to provide the finished, polished product in unrealistic time frames and try and get everything in there. And it's like, well, do we really need this? Do we need to be spending time looking at these micro optimizations of the code? No, probably not, because we don't even know if the product's going to need to be that optimized. Why are we writing code that is scalable to 1 million users when we know that the client that's going to be using it's got 100 logins?
I had a client once. Well, I won't tell you the long story. Just suffice it to say that they started the project with dreams of server farms dancing in their heads, and wound up with deploying single units that thought they were server farms.
Right. Yeah. So I think that when people look at Agile, it goes one of two ways. I think that they either overcomplicate it or they totally miss the whole point behind it. And it's something that I've been trying to address with clients that I work with. It's something that I'm looking to start talking about more publicly as well. What's your take on that? Where do you stand on that?
So I've just finished a book, and the name of the book is Clean Agile. And the reason I wrote the book is because I've been experienced this ever-increasing frustration with where Agile is going in the industry. It started as a very simple idea 20 years ago, and since then it has kind of gotten twisted and turned and perverted in some sense. One of the ways that happens, one of the most common ways that happens, is that a necessary part of Agile gets abandoned. And that necessary part is the engineering practices at the core of Agile. Things like test-driven development, refactoring, simple design, and pair programming. these four things knit together into the engineering practices that keep the quality high enough so that the speed of Agile and the rhythm of Agile does not lead you into a mess. And what we've seen over the years, over the decades now, is that many companies look at the business-facing practices of Agile, the idea of working in short segments and getting lots of feedback, and they think that that's enough. And so they try to drive the project without a good engineering foundation at the core, and they wind up finding that that kind of Agile is a really great way to make a huge mess and slow down so far that you can't make any progress. Martin Fowler once called this flaccid scrum. Scrum that cannot maintain its integrity, that eventually goes limp on you.
Yep.
And so that's one of the things that happened to Agile. And that was an early problem with Agile. That started probably within the first couple of years. People adopting Agile did not want to bring the really hard part, the engineering practices, into Agile. They wanted to figure out a way to do it without doing the hard stuff. And there is no way to do it without doing the hard stuff. You have to buckle down and learn those engineering practices. Scrum, which is one of the family of Agile processes, specifically did not mention the engineering practices. It was never part of Scrum. And so this happened to attract the attention of project managers and project leaders around the world, and they thought, okay, great, let's just do that, and we can let the team figure out what the engineering practices would be, if any. And that's not a good strategy, right?
Yep. Just leave the developers to try and decide how they're going to do things, how they're going to chop it up, and how they're going to deliver it. It does end in tears a lot of the time.
Well, it does if the team is then told, and we've got really tight deadlines, and we really have to make all these mission points, and all the features have to be developed, and there's no time for testing, and there's no time for pairing. But go ahead, team, and decide how you're going to do all this.
Yeah.
And if you've got a team of relatively young developers, which most teams are, they're not going to have the internal maturity to say, no, we need to do these engineering practices. We need to write tests. We need to refactor, because if we don't, we're going to lose control and the project's going to go off the rails.
Yeah. One of the big things that I've seen is that people take the idea of being agile as, we don't need a plan. We don't need to know where we're going. We just need to know where the end goal is. So they go, right, we want to build a system that does X, Y, and Z. Go and make it. And the developers go, okay. And they've got no plan of attack. They don't really know what they're delivering. There's no goals. So people go, is it going all right? And they're like, we think so. There's no measurement there, and no yardstick to say, right, here's the first point, here's the second point. This is what we're aiming for.
This has been another one of the constant problems within Agiles. Somewhere along the line, somebody came up with the idea that Agile meant no planning and no documentation, and none of the ritual that was associated with larger processes. Right? It was a rebellion against all of that, and therefore we can't plan, we can't have architecture, we can't have documents. And of course, this is nonsense. Good Agile teams do plan. They do designs. They do think through their projects. They don't spend months at it. But they don't have a big phase at the beginning where they do all the design up front. But a good Agile team spends an awful lot of time planning and designing and working through issues on a week by week basis. The beginning of every iteration, you spend a little bit of time planning that iteration and doing a little bit of design work and all of those things that in some circles have been rejected as non-agile.
I think for myself, you've got obviously the Agile Manifesto, and maybe that no documentation comes from people that they're looking at the values of Agile, and the people that are looking at it and then planning how they're going to do the work, or not planning how they're going to do the work, are people that aren't in a position to really interpret and understand those values correctly. Because I think one of them is software that works over documentation. So I think that's been taken as, well, just make it work, and everything will be all right because you're software developers, so you'll just know how it works, won't you, by reading the code?
Yes, over documentation does not mean no documentation.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things like that, and you end up with the managers going, so when's this going to be delivered? And because you haven't sized anything, you haven't looked at what you've actually got to deliver, you've got no way of actually understanding that at all. And I don't think you'll ever be able to successfully deliver a project unless you actually done some sort of planning up front.
Some kind of planning is always necessary. And by the way, the plans often change. The plans do not always predict what you're actually going to do, but the active planning is really important. It sets the vocabulary and the context and gets everyone talking about the same thing. It was Dwight Eisenhower, I think, who said, when facing the enemy, plans are useless, but planning is essential.
Yeah, and obviously I mentioned planning out what we're going to do a couple of times there, but that is not a set in stone plan, and you have to do exactly that for the entirety of the project, and come hell or high water, we are going to stick to the plan. That plan could change day to day or hour to hour, depending on what comes in and what the requirements change to when you show the customer.
Now, another thing that's happened to Agile over the years is that it has been adjectives have been added. That's probably the best way to say it. And this happens because there are consulting organizations that need to differentiate. And so in order to differentiate from each other, they add an adjective to Agile. So it'll be safe Agile or free Agile or modern Agile or green Agile or whatever. There's just some different aspect. And these companies, of course, in order to do this differentiation, have to invent a whole bunch of new practices or new ideas. And so the core of Agile gets twisted and turned and perverted. This company's version of Agile is better than that company's version of Agile. So one of the reasons I wrote the book was just to bring us back to the core. What was Agile originally? What should it be now? What should it be in the future? And some of the ideas about green and purple Agile might be great, but they're not what Agile was. And so I wanted to bring everybody back to the center so they knew what Agile was, and then they could look out and judge whether, green and purple and modern and old and whatever, all these adjectives are appropriate for them.
Yeah. And we sort of talked there about people ignoring the basics of what you should be doing. But then there's the other end of the stick, which I think that some of these practices, when they get their labels like safe, that people go all in and they think that they have to implement every single piece of technique to execute their Scrum or their Kanban or whatever it is they're doing. And I think what they're missing is the fact that Agile is a framework. You pick and choose what works for you. There's nothing set that says you have to do everything to the letter exactly this way. Otherwise, you're not working in an Agile manner.
Agile is it's a set of disciplines, right? It's a set of exercises and ideas. It's not a process. It's not something you work through step by step. It's a set of disciplines that you commit to follow. So one discipline is the discipline to work in short cycles, 2 weeks. Maybe you want a shorter cycle. Maybe it should be 1 week. Maybe you want a longer cycle. Maybe it should be 3. I don't recommend 3, but if you choose 3, okay. And so you have some flexibility within these disciplines to pick and choose a little bit. Another one of the disciplines is pair programming. Well, do you have to pair 100% of the time? No, you could pair 50% of the time. You could pair 20% of the time. As long as you are doing a certain amount of pairing and as long as you are achieving the goal that pairing is trying to get you to solve, which is for everybody on the team to know enough about what everybody else on the team is doing so that if somebody goes down, you can step in.
Yeah.
A team of developers needs to act like a team, and a team has the ability to cover for players that go down. And that happens in software teams as well. You lose a player sometimes because they get sick or they're having a fight with their significant other or something like that, and somebody else has got to be able to step in. And it's hard to step in if you haven't worked with that person at least a little bit. So, you have the flexibility to stretch or twist that practice a little bit, but you do have to achieve the goal of that practice. Test-driven development is another one of these practices, right? There are a whole bunch of different ways to approach test-driven development, but you'd better be producing a suite of tests that you trust with your life. Otherwise, you're going to lose control of that code. You're not going to be able to refactor it and clean it.
Yeah.
And if you can't refactor it and clean it, then you're going to slow down and life is going to become hell.
Yeah.
In short.
Yeah. Okay. And that test suite takes a lot of development time, and I think that scares people. Is that I could write this bit of code and I could have it done in 10 minutes, but if you want me to write all the tests around it, it's probably going to take me an hour, 2 hours, and then you scale that up to a big feature. That's a big increase in delivery time, at least up front with these projects, and I think that scares project managers and product owners and people like that.
It does. It scares them because you look at the number of tests you write, and it's a very large number of tests. What you discover as you become good at test-driven development is that you shrink a whole bunch of other times. You shrink all your debug time down to very small numbers. You have the ability to clean the code because you have this test suite, and so understanding the code becomes much easier. Changing the code becomes much easier. Cleaning the code becomes much easier. So in the end, you are saving vast amounts of time by writing those tests, far more than the test costs you.
Yeah.
And people then will say, well, yes, but it's one of those long-term versus short-term things, right? In the end, we save time, but we're not working on the end. We've got to get stuff done now. And my response to that is that test-driven development you will start to feel the effects of test-driven development within about 2 hours. You will start going faster within about 2 hours once you've learned to do test-driven development well. A day cannot go by where you don't feel the benefits, where it's not profitable for you to be using test-driven development. Yeah,
and I think if you're not following that practice, at least to some degree, that I hear a lot of people saying the phrase "fail fast," but if you have no way of quantifying your code, that fail fast becomes fail fast and fail continuously. It's you're never going to win, really. So we talked about what people do wrong to a point with Agile, and how Agile is a good thing. But is it right for every project, or are there projects that really they do better without Agile, or there's no real reason to follow Agile to do?
In general, I would say that there is no domain that does not benefit from Agile. So, for example, medical software, aeronautical software, military software, all of that I think benefits from Agile. The kinds of projects that might not benefit from Agile are those that are so absurdly small that you can't fit them into even a single iteration, like a 2-week segment. So, for example, I have a little tool I want to write, and the little tool maybe takes me 4 hours. Well, I'm not going to do a whole Agile development thing for a 4-hour tool. Now, what practices will I do? Well, I will do test-driven development for that, and I will do refactoring for that. Beyond that, probably not too much, maybe a little simple design, although for a 4-hour tool, I think I could do that in my head.
Yeah.
But I will have a test suite by the time it's done.
Sure. So we mentioned earlier Safe Agile. Now, Safe Agile, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is designed for doing Scrum at large scale.
Yes.
Is there a point where the teams become too big to effectively do Agile?
Yes. Yeah, and in fact, Agile was specifically stated to be a small practice for small teams doing small things. And that is what Agile is. It was designed to be something for small teams to use. Large projects are best accomplished with many small teams.
Yep.
So you can have lots of small teams doing normal Agile. And then the problem is you need to somehow combine the work of those small teams. Now, that's what people invent things like less and safe and scaled, and there's a few others. And they try to say, well, we need some kind of agile-like thing that goes on top of agile to make large agile projects. This has always confused me. It's confused me because human beings have been very good at doing large projects for 50,000 years or more. Right. I mean, we built the pyramids. We sent a man to the moon. We won World War II. These were extremely large projects, which were, of course, accomplished by thousands of little tiny teams. So it seems to me that we know how to make little tiny teams work together well. What we did not know in 1999, when Agile began, what we did not know, or what we had forgotten, is how to make small teams to work well. If you go back into the early days of software, you go back to the 1950s, and you look at the way those guys were working. If you looked at that carefully, you would say, they were working in a kind of agile way. So, for example, the programmers working on the Mercury spacecraft software, right, the avionics software for the Mercury spacecraft, they would write their unit tests in the morning and make them pass in the afternoon. They worked on these half-day cycles. Nowadays we think of Agile as, 2 weeks. That's a really short cycle. They were doing cycles down, below 1 day in length back in those days.
Right.
The early programmers adopted practices that nowadays we would think of as being agile. And then that got lost. And it got lost right around 1970 something. And for 30 years after that, we were stuck in this waterfall world. And the whole waterfall thing was kind of a bizarre accident. Some poor guy, Winston Royce, wrote a paper trying to say that waterfall would be a bad idea. And he made the mistake of showing the waterfall diagram on the first page, and everybody read the first page, I think, and thought, "Oh, this is a great idea." It's very weird, right? This paper, which was very counter to waterfall, had these pictures on the front page, and those pictures got photocopied into process documents in the military and around the world. It's very weird. So, people were citing this paper which said don't do waterfall, and they were citing it as a way to say we should do waterfall. Now when I was a boy, a young man, I should say, in my early 20s, that was about when waterfall hit. And I remember the trade journals, and I remember reading them, and I remember reading this concept of we could do the analysis first. And then when we were done with the analysis, we could do the design. And when we were done with that, we could do the implementation, and we could put dates on these phases. And that would be great. And I remember as a young boy, a young programmer, thinking, yeah, that would be great, because then when you were done with analysis, you would know you were 1/3 done. And when you were done with design, you would know that you were 2/3 done. That would be great. And for 30 years, we tried and tried and tried to make that work. And The more we failed, the harder we tried. It was a runaway process inflation that we kept on trying and trying. And then right around 1999, there was this mass rebellion. People my age, people who had gotten caught up in it in the 1970s, just looked around and said, what the hell have we been doing for the last 30 years? And started to rethink how software ought to be done. And this is where Scrum came from, and extreme programming, and Alistair Coburn's Crystal methods, and feature-driven development by Pete Code, and DSDM over on your side of the pond. All of these things came about right about the same time. And right because of this rebellion against this 30-year dominion of the heavyweight waterfall process. It's interesting to speculate, how did that happen? Why did that happen? Why did we all get so enthralled by this heavyweight process, the author of which said, please don't do this?
Yeah, maybe it's got some rooting in the human psyche, where we like to be able to predict the future, and it helped us, or appeared to help us, going, on this date we will deliver this, and this is exactly what you want, and this is what you'll get. And maybe it was something to do with that, and the fact that businesses like to be able to then forecast exactly when they were going to deliver, exactly when they were going to start making money on this thing. Whereas when we do Agile now, a lot of the time it's like, well, we should be able to deliver something within the next month, and then maybe in 6 months' time you'll have a finished product, but we won't know until closer to that point. And you've got all those unknowns that the upper management seem to be concerned about, because they can't plan too well with it, or they appear to not be able to plan for it.
Well, they can't know in advance when something is going to be done specifically, right? They can't get the plan. They can't see the plan and trust the plan.
Yeah.
In an agile world, you don't make that kind of a plan. You don't make a date-driven, milestone-driven plan. You do a suite of iterations, and you measure how many of those, how well you're doing in those iterations, how much you get done in those iterations, and that's how you do the planning in agile. And that can be scary to executives and managers who want to shed risk. But there isn't any way to shed the risk. The risk has to be managed, not shed. It's a fascinating problem. Managers have this problem of trying to get risk under control, and they will turn to developers and say, "Developers, you need to take on all the risk. Give us dates. Just give us dates, and then if you don't meet those dates, it's your fault." And that's not a fair thing to ask, because developers don't really know how long it's going to take them. So the managers try to shed the risk that way. And what developers have to do is push that risk back where it belongs, back into the management domain, because managers' job is to manage risk. Same thing happens with sales. Same things happen with marketing. The sales guys don't come up with an absolute plan telling us when every dollar is going to arrive. They're all in there going, well, if this customer has got about its 20% chance, but that customer's got about a 40% chance, and overall, I think we're going to make, $20 million, maybe. And so this level of risk management is what business is about.
Yep.
And software developers should not be ashamed of playing that same risk game with their managers. It is perfectly fair to say, you've asked me how long it's going to take me to do this project. Well, if everything goes right, I think it'll take me about 3 weeks. If things go the way they normally do, it'll probably take me 6 weeks. And if everything goes to hell, it's going to take me 20 weeks. That's a perfectly fair thing to say. And then as time goes on, you can shorten those times.
Yeah, and a lot of the businesses that I go into, the teams that I come in and work with have been very browbeaten because of waterfall, and then getting to the end of the process and not delivering what it was the customer wanted. And they've got to the point now where they would be scared of sticking their head above the parapet and going out on a limb and saying, well, actually, it, like you said, there was the three things. There was the happy path, the realistic path, and then the fire and brimstone path.
Yes.
And what they end up delivering is well, here's the happy path. This is what we'll deliver. We'll do it in 2 weeks. And you're like, well, is that realistic? No. And then you get that out and they go, right, okay. And then they go fire and brimstone and they go, oh, well, it's going to be 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And you're like, right, let's sit down and look at this objectively. And don't worry, we're not going to beat you with the fact that maybe it took you 4 weeks and you told us it was 3. I think it's a maturity level for everybody to get to. It's not just a developer thing. It's not just a manager thing. I think it's something for everybody to buy into and understand. And even with the client as well, the client has to have, or your end customer, sorry, should have some buy-in and some understanding of it. And maybe there's an education piece there for the account manager to get your customer to understand what Agile is and how you will be delivering the product.
I once executed a project for a customer. It was a fairly large project. It was several years worth of work. And the way we worked it with the customer was that the customer paid us an hourly rate, which was relatively small. Actually, it wasn't even an hourly rate. It was a monthly rate. And it was relatively small. It was enough for us to kind of eat, but not much more than that. And then there were some milestones identified. There were 36 of them. And each one of them had a bonus associated with it. So as soon as we could complete that milestone and as soon as the customer accepted it, the bonus was paid. Now, this is a very interesting share the risk kind of approach, because if it takes us a really long time to deliver those milestones, then we're not getting paid much per month. Yeah. On the other hand, if we go fast, we're getting paid a lot per month. And the opposite happens to the business, right? The customer doesn't have to pay a lot per month for stuff that's not getting delivered.
Yes.
So it's a pretty good share the risk model, which worked for us really, really well, and works in an agile environment very, very well.
Yeah, I quite like that. I could see how that would work, and that's an interesting concept that I've not come across before. So if we've got people out there that they currently get told they work agile, they know they don't work agile, what advice would you give them to actually get the first foot on the ladder to becoming agile?
Well, agile is not difficult to understand. There are several very good books that describe it. I just wrote one. I hope it's a very good book. There are others that I can recommend as well. And one of the best to go back to is Kent Beck's original Extreme Programming book, way back from 1999. Extreme Programming Explained, which is a tremendous book, very simple to read. It'll give you the idea in very short order. And if you read a book like that, you will understand what the core of Agile really is, and how simple that core is. And by the way, simple is kind of like, the game of Go has very simple rules, but it takes a lifetime to master. Same kind of thing with Agile. Very, very simple rules, but mastering it takes a fair bit of experience. But that's what people ought to do, is go back to those original works. Some of the early writings of Kent Beck and Martin Fowler and Ward Cunningham are still around, and those would be worthwhile perusing. I would be careful of companies offering agile transitions. Some of them are fine. They will do a good job and they will coach you, but be careful that you're not getting green agile or purple agile or some guy's agile. Read the works first. Make sure that what they're telling you is the same as what's in the book, and if it's not, why it's not. And do the homework, right, before you hire somebody to transition you to Agile.
I think one of the things that I've done in the past with clients that I've tried to bring into this sort of space is don't prescribe them straight away to Scrum or to Kanban or to Safe or one of the others that we've said. Just get the basics right first, and then look at some of these other flowery bits of process to go on the top. Get the simple things right, because without them, I don't think you've got a basis for anything at all apart from a big pile of steaming something.
Yeah, get the basics right, get the foundation right, and then you can build on that.
Sure. So I think that's all we've got time for today, unfortunately. I think we could probably spend hours and hours talking about this sort of thing, but as is with Agile, we shouldn't be talking about it for hours. We should be getting the basics right and getting out there and doing Agile. So I think this is the time for the listeners to switch this off and go buy the new book from Uncle Bob and start doing Agile cleanly. Do it right. You're writing clean code. Let's do Agile clean as well.
Yes.
So that just leaves me with to say thank you for coming on and talking to us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone out there for listening to The Cynical Developer. I'm James Stoddart, and you've been listening to Uncle Bob Martin talking about Agile back to basics. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help The Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.